The Appalachian Mountains hold many secrets. They whisper tales of love, loss, and vengeance. This is one such tale, a tale where the veil between life and death is pierced by a mother's love. This is the story of the Greenbrier Ghost. Zona Heaster was a bright light in her small town. She was known for her beauty, her kindness, and her infectious laughter. She had married young, a man named Erasmus Trout Shoe. Their courtship was brief, their marriage even shorter. Zona's family had their doubts about Trout. He was a brooding man, quick to anger. Despite their reservations, Zona's family welcomed Trout into their home. But their prayers, it seems, went unanswered. Zona was found dead in her home. It was a cold January day when Zona's body was discovered. A young boy, sent on an errand, stumbled upon the scene. He found Zona lying at the foot of the stairs, her body still and lifeless. The boy ran for help, his young voice echoing the horror of his discovery. News spread quickly, reaching Zona's husband, Trout, who rushed home. He arrived to find his home filled with neighbors, their faces etched with shock and sorrow. The local doctor, Dr. George W. Knapp, was summoned. Dr. Knapp examined Zona's body, but his examination was brief. He declared the cause of death to be everlasting faint, a catch-all phrase for heart failure. But something about Dr. Knapp's hasty diagnosis did not sit well with those who knew Zona best. Trout Shoe, Zona's husband, seemed inconsolable. He wept openly, his grief a tangible presence at the funeral. But even in his sorrow, there was something that struck people as off. He hovered over Zona's casket, possessively adjusting the high-necked gown and scarf he had chosen for her. Zona's mother, Mary Jane Heaster, watched Trout with a growing sense of unease. The doctor's explanation, everlasting faint, rang hollow in her ears. Mary Jane had never fully trusted Trout, and now his behavior fueled her suspicions. A mother's intuition whispered that something was terribly wrong. The sun had begun its descent, casting long shadows across the small town of Greenbrier. A young boy, barely a teenager, made his way along the dusty road, a sense of foreboding settling in his gut. He was headed to the Shoe residence, a simple wooden house at the edge of town, to run an errand for his mother. As he approached the house, he noticed an eerie silence. The front door stood slightly ajar, creaking ominously in the wind. He called out, his voice trembling, but there was no answer. Hesitantly, he pushed the door open and stepped inside. He took a few tentative steps into the dimly lit hallway, his heart pounding in his chest. And then he saw her. Zona Heaster Shoe lay sprawled at the foot of the stairs, her lifeless eyes staring vacantly at the ceiling. News of Elva's death spread through the small town like wildfire. Neighbors gathered outside the Shoe residence, their faces etched with shock and disbelief. Whispers of accident and foul play filled the air. Trout Shoe, Elva's husband, arrived home to a scene of chaos. He knelt beside Elva's body, his shoulders shaking with sobs. Dr. George W. Knapp, the town's only physician, arrived shortly after. He made his way to where Elva's body lay, his medical bag in hand. The doctor's examination was brief, his touch perfunctory. He pronounced her dead, attributing her passing to everlasting faint. But even as he spoke, a seed of doubt was planted in the minds of those who stood witness. The days following Elva's death were a blur of grief and suspicion. The community mourned the loss of a young woman, her life cut tragically short. But beneath the surface of sorrow, whispers of doubt began to circulate. Elva's mother, Mary Jane Heaster, was plagued by an unshakable feeling that something was amiss. She couldn't shake the image of her daughter's contorted body at the foot of the stairs. Trout Shoe's behavior did little to alleviate her suspicions. His actions, rather than offering comfort, only served to fuel the growing sense of unease. Mary Jane knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that this was not the end. The funeral was a somber affair. Mourners gathered, their faces etched with grief, their voices hushed whispers. Mary Jane Heaster, her face pale with sorrow, stood by her daughter's grave. Trout Shue, her son-in-law, stood beside her, his head bowed, his shoulders shaking with sobs. But Mary Jane felt a chill run down her spine as she glanced at him. His grief felt performative, lacking the genuine sorrow she expected. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, terribly wrong. A mother's intuition was screaming at her, telling her that her daughter's death was no accident. As the mourners paid their respects, Mary Jane couldn't help but stare at her daughter's body, laid out in the coffin. Zona looked peaceful, her face serene in death. But something was off. Zona's neck was wrapped in a thick white scarf, obscuring her throat. Mary Jane remembered that Zona rarely wore scarves, and even if she had, why would Trout choose to dress her in one for her final rest? It seemed odd. The image of the scarf, the way it hid Zona's throat, continued to haunt her. She lay awake in bed, her mind racing, replaying the events of the past few days over and over again. Sleep, when it finally came, brought no peace. Mary Jane was plagued by nightmares, vivid and disturbing. She dreamt of Zona, her face pale and drawn, her eyes wide with fear. In her dreams, Zona tried to speak, but her voice was a strangled whisper. One dream in particular left Mary Jane shaken to her core. She dreamt she was back in the shoe house, standing at the foot of the stairs. She saw Zona lying there, her body twisted at an unnatural angle, and standing over her, his face contorted in rage, was Trout. Mary Jane woke with a gasp, her heart pounding in her chest. Night after night, Mary Jane retreated to her small bedroom. The weight of her grief pressed down on her, heavy and suffocating. She knelt by her bed, her hands clasped together, her eyes closed in fervent prayer. She begged for answers, for guidance, for some sign, some whisper from beyond the veil. "Lord, give me strength," she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "Show me the truth about my Zona's death." She would not rest until she knew the truth, no matter how painful it might be. On the fourth night after Zona's burial, something extraordinary happened. Mary Jane was kneeling by her bed, her prayers flowing into the quiet room, when a cold spot settled over her. The air grew thick, heavy with an unseen presence. Slowly, tentatively, she opened her eyes. Standing at the foot of her bed, bathed in an ethereal glow, was a figure she recognized instantly. It was Zona. Her daughter's form shimmered, translucent, her features drawn and pale. But her eyes, those familiar, loving eyes, held a message of pain and urgency. Fear threatened to overwhelm Mary Jane, but a mother's love burned stronger. She held her breath, her gaze locked on Zona's spectral form. Slowly, haltingly, Zona began to speak. "Mother," Zona whispered, her voice thin and reedy, like the wind whistling through the trees. "It was not my time to go. I did not die of natural causes." Mary Jane's heart pounded in her chest. Who did this to you, Zona?" she cried out, her voice raw with anguish. Zona's form wavered, her image flickering like a candle flame in the breeze. Zona's ghostly hand rose, pointing a spectral finger at her own throat. "He did this, Mother," she whispered, her voice a chilling rasp. "Trout. He took my life." The room seemed to grow colder. Mary Jane could barely breathe, the truth settling over her like a shroud. Trout, the man she had welcomed into her home, had murdered her daughter. "He choked the life out of me, Mother," she whispered, her voice barely audible now. Zona's spirit had vanished, leaving Mary Jane alone in the cold, silent room. The next morning, Mary Jane Heaster woke with a newfound determination. Gone was the grief-stricken mother, replaced by a woman on a mission. She would avenge her daughter's death. She knew that no one would believe her story, the tale of her daughter's ghostly visit, but Mary Jane clung to Zona's words. Her ghostly testimony, the only weapon she had against the man who had taken her daughter's life. She marched to the office of John Preston, the local prosecutor. Preston, a skeptical man, listened patiently as Mary Jane recounted the events of the past few weeks. He saw not a madwoman, but a mother desperate for justice. Word spread through Greenbrier like wildfire. Erasmus Trout Shue, the grieving widower, was now the accused, charged with the murder of his wife, Elva Zona Heaster Shue. The trial was set to be the most sensational the town had ever seen. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Townsfolk, eager to witness the unfolding drama, packed the benches. At the prosecution's table sat John Preston, his face stoic, his eyes sharp. Trout Shue, his face pale and drawn, sat beside his lawyer, a bead of sweat trickling down his temple. The trial commenced. Witnesses were called, evidence was presented. Mary Jane Heaster took the stand. A hush fell over the courtroom. She swore on the Bible. John Preston guided her through her testimony. Mary Jane recounted her daughter's spectral visits with conviction. The courtroom held its breath. Mary Jane Heaster's testimony hung in the air, gripping all those present. The jury, faces etched with skepticism, heard a mother's belief in her daughter's words from beyond the grave. The defense seized on the supernatural elements, arguing her grief clouded her judgment. But prosecutor John Preston stood firm, pointing to the broken neck and inconsistencies in Trout Shue's story. After days of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. Guilty. Erasmus Trout Shue was found guilty of murdering his wife, Elva Zona Heaster Shue. Life imprisonment. The story of the Greenbrier Ghost echoed far beyond the hills of West Virginia. It became a national sensation, a tale whispered around campfires. Newspapers ran headlines proclaiming murder solved by a ghost. The case, with its blend of murder and mystery, captured the public's imagination. It sparked debates about the power of a mother's love and the existence of ghosts. Years later, the Greenbrier Ghost remains a haunting reminder of bonds that transcend life and death. Elva Zona Heaster. Shue's tragic fate and her mother's pursuit of justice continue to fascinate. Her grave has become a pilgrimage site for those seeking to pay their respects. The Greenbrier Ghost, a testament to the enduring power of love and mystery.